Welcome to the Landscaping Podcast. My name is Joel Barnett and I'm your host. And in today's episode, I'm doing Instagram Live number 9. And this one I'm doing on the Landscaping Podcast live as well as the InStyle Gardens podcast. So I've got 2 phones in front of me, so we'll see how well that goes. So actually coming out tomorrow's episode is with Adam White from Dorset Botega. So he's based in Brisbane and he's a pretty cool cat to talk to as well. So I chatted to him before the podcast, and as soon as I spoke to him, I knew it'd be an awesome episode, and it was. So it goes for like an hour and 10 minutes. So that comes out on the 13th of March. So if you're listening to this as a podcast, it's already out. But that's a really good episode and awesome guy to follow. So if you've got any questions, chuck them in down the bottom. I'll keep my eyes on both phones and see as they come up. Fair chance I'll get confused, so I apologise in advance. The first question is from the Planet Space. I've been told a quote should be split around 50-50 for labour and materials. Does that theory have any merit? So I would say it doesn't. It's just like an old wives' tale, because I sent a message for a good example. If I was doing, say, 20 square metres of paving, so if you were using 800 by 400 bluestone, say 20 mil thick, the cost of that isn't too much more expensive than what crazy paving is to buy. So let's say your materials to buy are pretty similar. Might be $10 a metre difference, so $200. But the labour for say 20 square metres, you could do that in 2 days. You could lay it and grout it if you were doing the 800 by 400, whereas it's going to take 6 or 7 days to do the crazy paving. So 3 times the amount of labour for the same area of paving. So that's just one example, but there's heaps of different examples you could use. Like it depends on the access, the cost of the stone that you're using. You could use, like another example, paving. If you could be using 800 by 400 bluestone, which is one of the cheaper natural stones, and compare that to some sort of fancy limestone or imported stone that might cost $200 a square metre. So the materials in that are going to be a lot higher. It's not like sometimes you might look back when you do a quote, see out of interest, see what the ratio is for the labour compared to materials, but there's certainly no hard and fast rule on it. Next question was from Clint. So Clint Adams wasn't one worth reading out, but he's got the full landscape podcast, and the episode he just released the other day with Steve Lowe from Ian Barker Gardens, probably one of the best landscape podcast episodes I've heard. So definitely worth listening to that. It was interesting because Steve's he's the construction manager there at Ian Barker Gardens, so he doesn't own the business, but the amount of value that he's got in that episode is crazy. So it's well worth having a listen to that. So the full landscape. Next one is from Shellbell. She's got a couple here. What's the best? I've written this really small, so I can't read it properly. What's the best study or qualifications to have to help you get a job in landscaping? So I think the best thing to have to help get a job in anything is passion for it. So it doesn't matter what sort of paperwork you've got, but as long as you love what you do, that's what someone's going to care about more. So yeah, there's a lot of people who've got all the same, like everyone has their white card and all this other stuff. You can do that when you get a job if you absolutely have to, but just having someone who wants to work and wants to do the job is more valuable than any piece of paper. So and outside of that, if you were still wanting to do some study to find out what the best one is, I would work out who you want to work for and ask them what you think would be the best to give them a chance to get to work at their place, because they may also just see how keen you are to work there and might give you an opportunity straight away, and then say, while you're working here, you can study this or that. So that'd be a good way to do it, I reckon. And their other question was, what's the best computer program to use when designing new gardens or landscapes? So I've used Landwork CAD, so that's a good one for sort of engineering, mathematics, doing things, quite accurately. In terms of the presentation, Vectorworks is probably a bit better, and that does a lot of the things that the CAD programs do as well. And that can work to 3D. So if I was going to start again, I would do Vectorworks. I would use that. Some people use SketchUp, and then you've got all sorts of different rendering programs you can use on top of those programs as well. So there's a deep rabbit hole you can go down eventually, but if you're wanting to, it seems to me like a lot of companies use Vectorworks, so that'll get you a long way. But again, if there's a particular company or group of companies that you want to work for, ask them what they use. So then you've got more of a chance of learning that skill and then being able to work for that particular company easier. And then if you don't get in with them, at least you've got that skill on how to use that program. I got a question from Plummets. Who would win in a fight between Jason Hodges and Scotty Cam? I would put my money on Jason Hodges. I think he's younger, and I don't know where Scotty Cam is from, but I think Hodgie was from around Sydney. So yeah, I would have my money on him. So don't know if Scotty Cam's going to be at the Garden Show, but if he is, we'll see if we can hook that up. Chris O'Perko says, what process do you use to stick natural stone to pool coping on a fiberglass pool shell? So I'm not doing a lot of fiberglass pool shells at the moment, but in the past I've done a couple of different methods. So one was using Sikaflex on the pool shell and just mortar over the concrete beam, and that works pretty well. But other times I've just done straight mortar over both, and I've never had an issue with both. But in saying that, like if in times when you've had to pull the paver up, the mortar definitely doesn't stick to the fiberglass shell. It comes up pretty easily, sticks to the paver, and then you can see a nice smooth bottom to it. So that's not good for adhesion, but it does set at the right height, and it sticks to the slab. So I've never had any problems with them because the concrete beam should be moving with the pool shell. So it's not like they're moving at separate rates. They certainly shouldn't be. So they should be moving together, so it shouldn't matter too much. So, but yeah, if you wanted to go hardcore, go with Sikaflex, or the Marpe might have a better idea on something to use that might help, or the pool companies might have an idea. But yeah, that's what we use. Leaf by Leaf said, do you have your missus working on the books, or do you try to keep work and life separate? So my wife doesn't have anything to do with the business, doesn't care about it either. And yeah, that works well for us. I like working with numbers, and I like the accounting side of things. So I'm happy to do that myself. I don't need or want someone else doing that. So the only other time that she gets involved with the business would be when there's, because we've got a family trust set up. So she's a beneficiary of that. So if I'm making too much money, which hasn't happened for 7 years, I think, she can take a portion of what my income would have been, so that we don't have to pay as much tax. But you want to talk to your accountant about that. So a lot of people set up like that. When I first started the family trust, I reckon it was the year that I started it was when they changed it, but you used to be able to have your kids as a part of that as well. So you could, send part of the money to your wife, send part to the kids, a certain amount. But then they changed it, so now you can only send like $425 per child, which is not really worth it. But yeah, it was just a way of paying less tax by diversifying where the money goes. And everyone should want to pay less tax. Avada Gardens said, what is the rudest client experience you've had, and how did you deal with it? So I've had a couple in the design side of the business where I had one fellow, back when I was charging $770 for a design, I did a design for him and then sent it to him, and he sent me a message saying how disappointed he was because he thought he'd be getting 3D images for that price. I said, well, it's a pretty cheap price. This was only like 5 years ago, I reckon. So it wasn't that long ago that the design prices should have been that cheap. But yeah, he expected 3D, and he said, I've got a friend who's in Melbourne who's a landscape architect, and they said for that price I should be getting 3D renders. So yeah, so he didn't pay the full amount, and I just, whatever, who cares? There's no point arguing with it. Like, there's just people like that who exist. So every now and then you're going to come across it. as long as you move on pretty quick, there's no point stressing about it because it's just money. And then you just learn from that mistake. So even though it wasn't a mistake that I'd made, but just learn from that experience, I suppose. So now what I do is I'll charge 50% of the price, the design price, before we start the design, and then 50% before I present it to them. So then you pay before they've got the design, and explain that to them before you start the whole process. So it's not a surprise to them. Because I've had people just recently actually, so I said all that, we went out and measured up the job, and then everything was all good. Asked them what their budget was, and I said it's probably going to cost a bit more than what you like, but we'll work towards that. And then I sent the invoice, and then hadn't paid for a week, so I followed up saying, yeah, are you happy to go ahead with the design? And they said, no, we're not. Our budget's probably 12,000 or 15,000, so can't proceed with that. So if I hadn't have charged that deposit up front and we just started the design, then that would have been a waste of time as well. We would have done the design, and then they wouldn't have gone ahead with it anyway and wouldn't have paid for it. So that's something from that initial rude client where I learned from it. So once bitten, twice shy. Next question is from Greenco Landscapes. How hectic is that good breathing mask you have? Is it good? Is it cool enough? So that's in relation to a few reels I've been doing where I've been cutting natural stone. So I've got a full face mask respirator. So it's from 3M, and I think it's the model number's 6,800. Don't know what any of that means, but it's like a full face mask with the clear shield on the face, and then two filters. So they're changeable filters. So probably just about due for a change actually, but that's just so you're not breathing in dust, and it's protects your face as well and your eyes. So yeah, I love it. Costs about $400 when you include the filters, but then the filters might be $20 to replace every. Depends how often you use it, but if you were using it full time, it'd probably be, I reckon, maybe once a week you'd change it, but that's full time for a week, so you get a fair bit out of it. And don't quote me on that. You're better off changing it too much than not enough. But yeah, I haven't used it on a hot day, but I haven't had any issues. Like, you can breathe normally in it. You can breathe fast. So yeah, I can't see why it'd be any different to if you weren't wearing one. It doesn't, because not a lot of your face is inside it. The top of your head's still out of it, so that's expelling a lot of the heat. But yeah, I love it. Leaf by Leaf has got another question. What's your thoughts on uniform? Is it necessary on a building site? And more importantly, what's your thoughts on track pants in winter? For drop kicks only, or... So start with the track pants. That's for drug dealers only on site. But in saying that, I did wear tracksuit pants. I don't know, was it last year or the year before maybe? I had an operation on around my backside area. So I was supposed to be at home resting, but we needed work to get done. So I was just on site, but I couldn't wear anything other than tracksuit pants. So, and I'm not a drug dealer. So there are exceptions when they're acceptable on site, but not very often. And in terms of a uniform, I love uniforms. So I think it looks so much more professional than if you're not wearing it. Like you see a lot of concreters walking around in just a t-shirt and fancy coloured board shorts. That's, there's another, it makes no difference to the quality of work you're doing, but it just makes it look more professional, and maybe it does make a difference to the quality because you feel more professional, because you feel like part of a team. But yeah, and it's good for advertising. Just, yeah. And I tuck my shirt in as well. I don't make my staff do it, but that's something I do. But so I like to look professional. But in saying that, we've got a singlet, and I wear that a fair bit. So that's obviously not that professional, but at least it's a branded singlet. So it's got the logo on the front and the back, and they're all the same. So I think anything with your logo on there makes a huge difference with how professional you look. And and that's like the word of mouth is the best way to get work, and that's one of the things that contributes to that is the professionalism. Desert Flower Landscaping said, what was the highlight of the podcast we did together? I did say to him that it was the end of the podcast because it was over with, but I was only joking, obviously. But the first few minutes was a great start because that was, I've done it a few times where when I start recording the podcast or when I start the Zoom call with the guest, I've got the Zoom recording automatically because I don't ever want to forget to press record because that'd be shattering to have a great conversation and realize I didn't record it, because you don't not only have to do it again, but I'd feel embarrassed and it just wouldn't be the same. I feel bad enough taking up people's time anyway without having to do it twice and say all the same things again. So it records as soon as the Zoom call starts, as soon as I started on my end. And then we're just usually chatting for a little bit at the start with the guest before. And then, sometimes it's 2 minutes in and sometimes it's 15 minutes in. The episode with Adam White this week it was 20 minutes in before we started recording because he was driving around his property to get service. So it varies on when it starts, but the one that I did with Malcolm, we started, getting into value straight away before I'd started the actual, podcast officially. So there was so much good stuff in there that I decided to put that in, even though it doesn't sound all that professional from me, so, doing that, but it's more about the value that you get out of it. So that was a good thing to have. And I did like also talking to him about the yoga. I was doing that. I've certainly got a lot slacker on that these days, but I'm just sort of working and sleeping and getting up and getting straight into work again. So after the garden show is done, I'll get back into it again. But my body's feeling pretty good now, so it's not like I'm struggling without doing it. But yeah, that was good to talk about. Abcam Horticulture asked this question end of the last episode, but just missed out. But he said, do you receive a plan from a designer and think that a certain part of it won't work, either functionally or aesthetically? And if you do, how do you go about fixing the problem? So he gave a good example because he obviously does maintenance. And he was talking about how if there's a swimming pool and it's got a 400 mil beam around the outside, and then just immediately next to that beam is a garden bed with a hedge in there that is supposed to be 3 or 4 meters tall. So there's obviously no room for him to put a ladder or something to get up to that height. Like, it's all good and well trimming the face of it, but to be able to get to the top, you need to get up there. So that was a good example that he gave, but it's one that I wouldn't have thought of. So that's something that's important for designers to think of when they're doing designs, is how are you going to maintain it? So if you want a hedge to be that high, you need to think about providing enough room to be able to get a ladder in there. So what I would do in that case is talk, like, obviously once it's built, you can't do anything about it, but talk to the designer about it and explain it to him, exactly like he's explained it to me. And it's the same in terms of construction. If you're doing construction and you realize something that it's hard to do and can be done easier, you can still do it so that it's done the way the designer said so, but talk to the designer and say, this was a bit of a problem here, maybe we could do this solution instead. So you certainly don't want to go to the client and start whinging about it directly to them, because that doesn't help anybody. It just makes it awkward because they may absolutely love the design or everything they do, and then you might look like an idiot, and that's because the way it was done was something they specifically asked for. So yeah, just communication is the key to that, as well as just like most things. So yeah, you're better off talking to them about it, and then you can both learn from it. And they may explain to you, we couldn't do it that way because of X, Y, or Z. And then it might make sense to you. So you both learn something out of it. So yeah, it's a great question because I've said it to, I think it was when I was talking to Bethany Williamson about how valuable it was when she was working for Ian Barker Gardens, having the construction team part of the business as well. So that for that exact reason, so you can design something, and then if something doesn't work, they're there to explain, well, this didn't work or that worked. So it's good having that. Whereas if you're just a design company, you're not getting that feedback from the construction crew or the maintenance crew. So again, Ian Barker Gardens got the maintenance as well, so they can have that all three communicating together. So yeah, good question, and that's also a good example of how important that is to communicate, even especially when you don't have the different arms of the business within your business, whether you're just design or just construction or just maintenance. Next one is from Illawarra Landscape Maintenance. Do you think your landscaping skills and knowledge were established as an employee with established more as an employee with different companies, or do you think you've improved your skills most through your own business and work? So it would definitely be more that my skills have grown a lot more working for myself, but I've also been working for myself for a lot longer. So I was working for someone else for I think 5 years, and I've been working for myself for 13 and a half years. So just purely by the weight of numbers, I've learned more in that 13 and a half years than I did in the 5. But in saying that, I was horrendous when I started landscaping as an apprentice. Knew absolutely nothing. And everyone I knew thought it was weird that I was going into a trade, because I just had no, there's nothing about me that was saying that I would have gone into a trade. Don't know what they thought I would have been doing, but I'd worked in hospitality before that, so I just assumed that's what I was going to do. So I did like working in bars and that sort of thing, but more restaurant bars. But yeah, certainly not anything trade related. And then on my first, like actually when I was at school, I was doing graphics in year 9, and the teacher told me that I shouldn't do it in year 10 because I was that bad at it. So he didn't recommend that I go on with it. So I was certainly no good at the artistic side of things. And then in woodwork, I used more putty than anybody else because all my cuts were horrendous. I was really bad at it. So, and then electronics, I did that for one day, and didn't make any sense to me. I had no idea what I was doing. So I had no idea what I was doing at all when I started landscaping. Literally hit my thumb with a hammer on the first day, and just thinking, what have I got myself into? So in terms of what I learned, like if you put it into 2 5-year periods next to each other, I definitely learned more as an employee than what I did in the first 5 years of business. Because in the first 5 years of business, you're sort of just doing stuff you already know and kind of building that, establishing the business as your own. You're not doing a lot of new things like I do now, like expanding your skill set. Like that's how I was doing it anyway. So going from 0 to what I learned at the end of my time as an employee was definitely a lot more than from year 5 to year 10. That's just purely landscaping skill related. There will be a shortish one this week. Still going 23 minutes, but this one's from Jaden at Weber Landscapes. What do new employees say when you tell them that you don't have any breaks during the day? That's an interesting time for that question, because we'll talk about that again in the episode with Adam White that's just coming out. But so when I have a new employee on, I'll tell them that they can stop for a break if they want to. But obviously, if you can have smoking whenever you want, but if you stop for a lunch break, you don't get paid for that. So you're going to be here for the same amount of time. But like if you stop for half an hour, you won't get paid for that half an hour. So you can do it, but it's just not something I like to do, because I don't feel good after sitting down and eating for half an hour. So you can do whatever works for you. And like my guys bring food and they eat during the day, but it's not like a formal sit down where everyone stops at the same time and sits down and chats for half an hour that turns into an hour. So there's days where they have more breaks than not, and then there's days where they don't have any breaks at all. So it's just whatever works for you. So it's not that we don't have breaks, but it's just that they're not, you set 15 minutes at 10 o'clock and then half an hour at 12:30. You just do what feels right for you, and it's not the same every day. So just whatever works basically. But when I do say it, like when you put on a new employee, they'll agree to whatever you say anyway, because they're wanting to impress at the start. So they just no one's ever kicked up a stink about it. They just, their eyes get a bit wider, and then they say, "Oh, no worries." And some people are fine with it, and some aren't. But I guarantee you, it's a bit of a shock when you start doing it, but you soon learn that you can do a lot without having to stop and eat all the time. It's just about training your body, really. So that is it for today. So it is the shortest one, but some still good quality questions in there. So next week, what is today? Today's the 12th, so there'll be the 19th. That'll be so I'll be going to the garden show, because we start building at the garden show on the 20th, but I'll be going there on the 19th to start setting it up and getting the geo fabric down and marking out where things are going. So when we do this chat, this Instagram live next week, it'll be the day that I've been to the garden show to start setting out. So might have some more garden show questions next week possibly, but yeah, we're looking to put it out regardless. So this will come out. This episode is I don't know when this will come out on the Thursday. We'll do the same thing again next week. So next week will be the 10th Instagram live. We'll see how we go doing the one after that, because that'll be during the build. So that could be a good one though. I'll be pretty exhausted by that Sunday, but it'll depend how we're going with the build, whether I am home in time, or if it's not going ahead, that means things aren't going too well, and I'm stressing about getting finished. But next week we'll be on, and then we'll go on from there. So thank you very much for everyone who put in a question. And if you got, I did put the questions up a bit late this week, but we still had some good ones. But if you have any questions that come up during the week and I haven't put the question box up, feel free to send me a message, and I'll add it to the list anyway. But thanks to everyone who added a question and for tuning in.